China built a full replica of New York City, and no one moved in. Not a themed hotel, not a movie set. A full-scale financial district, modeled skyline by skyline, block by block, after the most famous city on Earth. China spent an estimated $300 billion building cities that sit almost completely empty. That's more than the entire GDP of Portugal. You heard that right. Enough money to fund an entire country, poured into cities where the lights are on and nobody's home. What you're about to hear isn't just about empty buildings. It's about the most ambitious and most haunting construction experiment in human history. And it starts with a skyline you think you recognize. Yujiapu Financial District, the Manhattan replica. You've seen the Manhattan skyline before. The glass towers, the steel, the way it rises out of the water like it was always meant to be there. You know exactly what it looks like. Now imagine standing in front of that same skyline and realizing you're in China. That's Yujiapu, a financial district built in Tianjin, just 30 miles southeast of Beijing, designed from the ground up to mirror Lower Manhattan. Not inspiration. Not a building or two that looks vaguely familiar. Twin towers, glass skyscrapers, a waterfront layout, the whole thing copied intentionally. The plan was staggering in its ambition. Tianjin wanted to become China's answer to Wall Street, a rival to Shanghai. A financial capital that would announce to the world that China wasn't just catching up to the West, it was ready to replace it. Billions were poured in. Construction moved at a speed that would make your head spin. At its peak, Yujiapu was one of the single largest construction projects on the entire planet. But then, something went wrong. The tenants never came. The banks never moved in. The trading floors were never filled. One by one, the developers who had borrowed heavily to build started running out of money. The cranes stopped. The towers sat half-finished, and what was supposed to be China's Wall Street became something else entirely, a hollow replica of a dream that never landed. If you walked through Yujiapu today, you would hear your own footsteps echo. Empty lobbies, vacant office floors, parking garages built for thousands of cars, sitting completely bare. A skyline that looks alive from a distance and feels like a ghost town the moment you step inside it. China had proved it could build Manhattan. What it couldn't prove was that anyone needed it. But Yujiapu was just the beginning. Because while Tianjin was busy copying New York, someone else was copying Paris. Tiandu Cheng, the Paris replica. Picture this. You're standing beneath the Eiffel Tower, the real one. Iron lattice, stretching 330 feet into the sky. Tree-lined boulevards in front of you. Ornate fountains. French architecture as far as the eye can see. Now picture all of that in the middle of rural China. That's Tiandu Cheng. Built on the outskirts of Huizhou, this wasn't a tribute to Paris. It wasn't inspired by Paris. It was Paris. A 1/3 scale Eiffel Tower. Haussmann-style apartments with wrought iron balconies. Wide European avenues designed to feel like you'd been lifted out of France and dropped into eastern China. Developers spent an estimated $200 million building it. It was designed to house over 10,000 residents. At its peak construction, it was one of the most photographed developments in the country. And when it opened, almost nobody came. The streets that were supposed to buzz with life sat silent. The fountains ran for no one. The apartments were bought, but not lived in. Investors snapped up units as assets, not homes. Because in China, at the time, property wasn't just somewhere you lived, it was somewhere you parked your money. And so Tianducheng became a city of owners with no occupants. A Paris where the cafes had no customers and the boulevards had no footsteps. But here's where the story takes a turn. Unlike most of the cities on this list, Tianducheng didn't stay empty. Slowly, very slowly, people started moving in. Not the wealthy elite the developers had imagined. Regular families, young couples, people who couldn't afford the skyrocketing prices of central Hangzhou and found that a Parisian apartment with an Eiffel Tower view was suddenly within reach. Today, Tianducheng is still far from full. But it's alive in a way that most ghost cities never become, which makes it the most hopeful chapter in an otherwise haunting story. But hope wasn't what was waiting in Dalian. Because the next replica wasn't just copying a city, it was copying an entire way of life, canals, gondolas, and all. Venice Town, the canal city. There is only one Venice, that's what everyone says. A city built on water, a city that defies logic. 118 islands connected by 400 bridges, with canals running through it like veins. It took centuries to build. It is slowly sinking into the sea. And there is nothing else like it on Earth. China disagreed. Welcome to Venice Town, Dalian, a full recreation of one of the most complex cities ever constructed, built not over centuries, but in a matter of years. Canal systems dug from scratch. Gondolas, imported and floating. Arched bridges, Venetian plazas, terracotta facades. The whole thing rising out of northeastern China like a fever dream. Dalian was already one of China's most cosmopolitan cities. A port city with a history of foreign influence, it had the bones to pull something like this off. Developers believed that if any Chinese city could sustain a Venetian lifestyle, the waterways, the architecture, the European atmosphere, it was Dalian. The project was marketed as the ultimate luxury address. A place where you didn't just buy a home, you bought an experience. But the experience had a fatal flaw. Venice works because it was built around people who had no other choice. The water was their road, the bridges were their streets. It wasn't aesthetic, it was survival. Dalian's Venice was built purely for beauty. And beauty, it turns out, isn't enough to make someone uproot their entire life. The canals sat still. The gondolas floated with no passengers. The plaza stood empty in a way that felt almost cruel. All that detail, all that craftsmanship, witnessed by almost no one. Today, Venice Town exists in a strange in-between state. It draws tourists. It draws photographers. People come to look at it the way you'd look at a painting from a distance, briefly, before moving on. But nobody stays. Nobody builds a life there. The original Venice is fighting every single day just to survive. The replica couldn't even convince people to show up. But as extraordinary as Venice Town was, nothing on this list quite prepares you for what came next, because the next project wasn't a financial district or a residential development. It was something far more calculated. And for one brief, bizarre moment, it actually worked. Florentia Village, the Florence replica. While Dalian was building canals, Tianjin was doing something different, something quieter, something that against all odds actually worked. Florentia Village didn't try to be a city. It didn't try to house thousands of families or replace a congested urban center. It had one job, one very specific, very focused job. To make you feel like you were walking through Renaissance-era Florence, and while you were feeling that way, to make you spend money. Colonnaded walkways, terracotta facades, Italian piazzas with fountains at their center, archways and cobblestones, and the kind of architecture that makes you slow down without even realizing it. Florentia was built as a luxury outlet mall, a lifestyle destination where China's growing wealthy class could shop for European brands inside a European setting. And unlike almost everything else on this list, people came. Not just came, they kept coming. But here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Because Florentia's success didn't prove that China's replica strategy was working, it proved the opposite. The only replica that thrived was the one that asked nothing of you. No commitment, no relocation, no rebuilding your life around a place that didn't yet exist. Just show up for an afternoon, spend some money, and go home. That was the secret the other projects never figured out. The difference between Florentia and every other city on this list wasn't architecture, it wasn't investment, it wasn't execution, it was ask. Florentia asked very little and got a lot in return. The others asked people to transplant their entire lives and got silence. And if that truth feels heavy, just wait. Because the next project didn't just copy a city. It didn't just copy a lifestyle. It copied something that could never be replicated. And it did it without asking anyone's permission. Hallstatt Replica, copying a UNESCO World Heritage Village. There is a village in Austria called Hallstatt. You may have never heard of it, but if you've ever seen a picture of it, you never forgot it. A tiny lakeside community of less than 800 people, tucked between a mountain and a glacier lake in the Austrian Alps. Colorful wooden houses stacked on top of each other. A church spire reflected perfectly in still water. Cobblestone paths so narrow 2 people can barely walk side by side. It is so beautiful that UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site. Hallstatt is also one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in the world. People have been living there for over 7,000 years. 7,000 years of history soaked into every stone, every beam, every narrow path carved into the mountainside. The village didn't just happen. It was built slowly, painfully, generation by generation, by people who had no choice but to make something extraordinary out of a nearly impossible landscape. And somewhere in China, a team of developers was photographing every single inch of it. Not sketching it, not drawing inspiration from it, photographing it, building by building, street by street, window by window. A Chinese developer called China Min Metals reportedly sent a team to Hallstatt to document the village in extraordinary detail so quietly, so methodically, that the people who actually lived there had absolutely no idea it was happening. No permission was asked. No announcement was made. The residents of Hallstatt went about their daily lives completely unaware that their entire village was being reconstructed on the other side of the world. Think about that for a moment. You wake up in the morning. You walk the same cobblestone path your grandfather walked. You pass the same church your great-grandmother was baptized in. You look out at the same glacier lake that has reflected this village for centuries. And somewhere, without your knowledge, without your consent, someone is measuring your windows. And then one day, it was finished. In Huizhou, southern China, a perfect copy of Hallstatt had appeared. The church, the lakefront, the mountain backdrop artificially recreated with landscaping and construction. The colorful facades replicated down to the window shutters, an artificial lake positioned to mirror the reflections of the original. It wasn't inspired by Hallstatt. It wasn't a tribute. It was Hallstatt copied stone by stone, detail by detail, without a single person in the original village ever giving their blessing. The cost was reported at around $900 million. You heard that right, nearly $1 billion, to recreate a village that 800 people built with their hands over 7,000 years. When the real Hallstatt found out, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Outrage. Disbelief. How do you process the fact that your home, the place your family has lived for generations, the village your ancestors carved by hand out of rock and necessity, has been duplicated on the other side of the planet without your knowledge? One resident described the feeling as having something stolen that couldn't even be named. A local official called it deeply unsettling. And then the mayor of Hallstatt flew to China to see it with his own eyes and stood in front of a copy of his own town hall, in a country he had never visited, looking at a door he recognized. That image alone should stop you in your tracks. And yet, as the shock settled, something unexpected happened. Some residents started to find it almost flattering. Uncomfortable, yes. Unsettling, absolutely. But also, in a strange, quietly human way, remarkable. Out of every city and town and village on the entire planet, China chose yours. But flattery doesn't answer the deeper question. What does it mean to copy something perfectly? If every detail is identical, every roofline, every cobblestone, every reflection in the water, at what point does the copy stop being a copy and start being something else entirely? Because Hallstatt in Huizhou doesn't have 7,000 years of history behind it. It doesn't have the glacier. It doesn't have the winters that forced those houses to be built exactly the way they were. It doesn't have the people whose great-grandparents carved those paths into the mountain just to survive. It has the shape of all those things, the outline, the shell, without the soul. And the people of Huizhou seemed to sense it. Because despite the investment, despite the extraordinary accuracy of the replica, despite the artificial lake positioned at precisely the right angle to catch the light, they didn't come. Not in the numbers anyone had hoped for. not in the numbers that would justify $900 million. Today, the Huizhou Hallstatt is partially inhabited. It attracts tourists. It has become one of China's most popular wedding photography destinations. Couples standing in front of a church that looks ancient but was poured from concrete a little over a decade ago. Brides pose on cobblestones that have never been worn down by centuries of foot traffic. Grooms stand in doorways that have no stories behind them. The real Hallstatt gets so overcrowded with tourists every summer that the village has had to introduce visitor caps just to protect what remains of normal life. The original is drowning in attention. The replica struggles to fill its streets on the best of days. And yet of all the cities on this list, Hallstatt is the one that stays with you the longest, because it doesn't just raise questions about construction or investment or economic strategy. It raises something older and harder to answer. Questions about what makes a place real, about whether you can compress the soul of somewhere into photographs and measurements, ship it across the world, and pour it back out in concrete and paint. You can't. But that didn't stop anyone from trying. And nowhere was that more obvious than in a little English village 30 miles outside Shanghai, where the red phone booths were real, the cobblestones were imported from Europe, and the entire town was almost completely deserted. Thames Town, the English village. Imagine walking down a cobblestone street. There's a red phone booth on the corner, a Gothic church at the end of the road, Tudor-style pubs with hanging flower baskets, Victorian townhouses with bay windows overlooking a quiet square, a statue of Winston Churchill standing watch over it all. You are 45 minutes outside Shanghai. Thames Town was built as part of one of the most ambitious urban expansion projects in Chinese history. In the early 2000s, Shanghai's government launched a plan called One City, Nine Towns. The idea was simple on paper. Shanghai was overflowing. The city center was overcrowded, overpriced, and overwhelmed. So they would build 9 brand new satellite towns around it, each one designed to draw residents out of the chaos and into something quieter, something newer, something better. And each of the 9 towns would be themed after a different country. One would be German, one would be Scandinavian, one would be Italian, and one Thames town would be English. Not vaguely English, not English-inspired. Fully, committedly, almost aggressively English. The developers imported real cobblestones from Europe. They built an Anglican-style church with stained glass windows. They lined the streets with Tudor architecture so accurate that photographs of Thames Town have genuinely fooled people into thinking they were looking at a village in the English countryside. The attention to detail was extraordinary, and the intention behind it was serious. Shanghai's middle class was growing at a speed the world had never seen before. Millions of newly wealthy families were looking for somewhere to put their money, somewhere to raise their children, somewhere that felt like an upgrade from the cramped city apartments they'd outgrown. Thames Town was supposed to be that place, a quiet, charming European escape just close enough to Shanghai to commute, just different enough to feel like a reward. But something went wrong almost immediately. The middle class came, and then they left. Not because they didn't like it, because they never intended to stay. Buyers snapped up the properties almost instantly. Units sold out fast. On paper, Thames Town looked like a roaring success. But the people buying weren't moving in. They were investing. In China's property market at the time, buying a unit in a new development wasn't about finding a home. It was about finding an asset. And assets don't need furniture. Assets don't need neighbors. Assets just need to exist and increase in value. So, Thames Town filled up with owners and stayed empty of people. The church held no congregations. The pubs served no regulars. The cobblestone streets that were designed to bustle with daily life saw nothing but silence and wind. An entire English village, built with extraordinary care and extraordinary cost, sitting frozen like a stage set with no actors. And then, something unexpected happened. Weddings, specifically Chinese wedding photography. Because Thames Town, despite being empty of residents, was absolutely perfect for photographs. The church made a stunning backdrop. The cobblestones looked timeless. The Victorian architecture gave every photo an old-world romance that no studio could replicate. Couples started arriving from across China not to live, not even to stay the night, but to spend a few hours being photographed in a place that looked like somewhere else entirely. On weekends, Thames Town transforms, brides in white dresses, grooms in suits, photographers directing couples in front of phone booths and church doors and Tudor facades. It is, in the strangest possible way, alive, just not in any way its architects ever imagined. People wanted the look of the West, the aesthetic, the romance of cobblestones and church spires and Victorian windows. They wanted to visit it, to photograph it, to borrow it for an afternoon, and then go home. Thames Town wasn't rejected because it was badly built. It was rejected because there was a gap between what was built and what people actually needed. And that gap, that same gap, runs through every single city on this list. The pattern. You've now walked through 6 cities. A Manhattan skyline rising out of Tianjin, a Parisian boulevard in rural Huizhou, Venetian canals in Dalian, a Florentine piazza built inside a shopping mall, an Austrian village copied in secret, an English town assembled from imported cobblestones 30 miles outside Shanghai. And in almost every single one of them, you felt the same thing. That silence, that eerie, suffocating stillness of a place that was built for a life that never arrived. Here's what nobody tells you. These cities weren't built by fools. They weren't accidents. They weren't even particularly unusual decisions given the world that produced them. You were operating inside a system that had one setting build. Local officials were promoted based on GDP growth, and nothing moved GDP faster than construction, so they built. Developers borrowed billions because the property market had never stopped rising and there was no signal it ever would. Buyers purchased units because real estate had made more Chinese families wealthy than any other investment in history. Every single decision made perfect sense inside the machine that made it. And that is exactly what makes it so devastating. This wasn't reckless. It wasn't delusional. It was rational. Completely, tragically rational. A system doing precisely what it was designed to do, building faster than people could follow, faster than demand could catch up, faster than the future itself could arrive. China built enough empty floor space to house the entire population of the United Kingdom twice over. You heard that right, twice over. And the lights are still on in towers where no one has ever spent a single night. But then something happened that no one predicted. People started showing up. Not in waves. Not overnight. Slowly. Quietly. Tiandu Cheng started filling unit by unit as young families priced out of Hangzhou discovered that a Parisian apartment was suddenly affordable. Thames Town drew thousands of visitors every single weekend, not as residents, but as something. Yujiapu attracted new investment. Even the replica of a UNESCO village in Huizhou found a purpose, not the one it was built for, but a purpose nonetheless. And that is the thing about building faster than the future. Sometimes the future catches up. China didn't just build ghost cities. It built a question that the entire world is still trying to answer. What happens when you have the power to construct anything? Any skyline, any street, any village, any dream, but you can't construct the reason for people to be there? You get the most breathtaking, most silent, most haunting proof of human ambition ever assembled. You get a Manhattan with no bankers, a Paris with no artists, a Venice with no fishermen, an Austrian village with no history, an English town with no English. You get the shape of civilization without the life inside it. And somewhere in China right now, in a city that looks exactly like somewhere you've been before, a single light is on in an empty building. The elevator still runs. The fountains still flow. The cobblestones are still perfectly laid. All of it waiting. All of it ready. For people who haven't come yet.